The first draft is all about creativity, getting your ideas down and immersing yourself in the world of your story. The second draft, however, is a whole different mindset. You need at that point to bring your critical brain online and start evaluating what you've written.
So watch this video to find out how to switch on your critical brain. Hi, I'm Rose, the book designer at Alkira Publishing.
And I'm Tahlia, the managing editor at Alkira Publishing.
So what's the first thing you recommend after finishing your first draft?
Don't look at it.
Get rid of it.
Seriously, put it away for at least 6 weeks. Give yourself space, and in that time, read other books in your genre. Really good books that sell well. Then, when you return to your draft, you'll have a much clearer perspective and do have something to evaluate your work against.
And should you share your first draft and get some feedback on it from friends and so forth?
I don't advise sharing that first draft. Stephen King never does. Not unless you're a very experienced author, but like I said, Stephen King says don't. He should know.
And why is that?
Well, because for most people, it's a bit like creative vomit, right? It comes out an inspired gush. And no one wants to see it really until it's cleaned up.
Brutal.
Yeah, most first drafts need a lot of work, and early feedback can feel demoralising if you're not ready for it. It's really better to wait until you've written a second draft.
So after you've had a break, what then? What does the second draft stage involve?
Well, it's all about evaluation. And at this stage, you're looking at the big picture elements. So plot, character arcs, themes, pacing, dialogue, and so on. And after reading some excellent quality books, you have a high standard against which you can do your evaluation. So you read through your manuscript, you take notes, and you be brutally honest. And you have to be ready for a complete rewrite if needed. That's part of the job.
What do you mean it's part of the job? Surely not. Surely not everyone has to do a complete rewrite.
No, of course not. You only do a complete rewrite if it's necessary, right? But every author needs to be willing to do a rewrite if it's needed. It's the willingness that's important. If you really don't want to rewrite anything major, then you might just ignore the signs that you need to and push on to the next stage without doing the necessary structural work.
And I guess once you get to the point of having a professional editor look at it, if it needs that rewrite, you're going to have to do it then anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's attitude.
So it's better to really do it yourself first before you involve another person.
Yes.
Yeah, fair enough. So what are the questions that writers should ask themselves during this revision stage?
Okay, so here's the main ones, right? The overview check is what's your story's theme and is it clear and consistent? The plot checks are, does your protagonist have a clear goal? And is there an antagonist with conflicting aims? As for characters, the question is, are your characters complex, realistic, and do they change emotionally, not just externally? You also have to ask, are there scenes in the story that you don't need, that doesn't move the story forward? If it doesn't move the story forward, then it needs to be deleted. Identifying subplots is important, and checking that they have their own arcs and that they contribute to the overall theme.
That's pretty thorough. It's like a checklist.
Yeah, I have a checklist.
Oh,
Yeah.
can they download it somewhere?
They can.
Oh, that's very helpful.
Yeah, there's a link in the description.
I would love that checklist if I was writing it, because it could, I feel like it could be really easy to like have written something and then be like, well, now I don't know how to go in and change it. I mean, I think for me, making a complete separate copy and leaving the first draft untouched and then making a copy of it and then rewriting on that copy would help my reticence to not rewrite anything, because it's like, what if I make it worse?
Yeah. And I always do that. And yeah, the checklist is really useful. I even use it myself.
Let's talk about pacing and structure. What should writers be checking for in this area?
Look at where your plot points fall and ask yourself, are the major events happening at the right time in accordance with general advice on plot structure. I suggest evaluating your work against a story structure model, like Michael Haig's 6-point story structure. It's a favourite of mine. You also need to check for info dumps. If you find big chunks of backstory, it's usually best to break them up and weave them in gradually.
It's a good way to lose attention if you're just reading a bunch of backstory.
Yeah.
And then what about character development?
Well, as we covered in our video on how to write great characters and the ones on character arcs, you need to make sure that they have emotional challenges and
Flaws.
Yes,
perfect characters are boring, in case you missed the memo on that.
Also, the stakes must feel real. Things should be hard, but not impossible. Okay. You need to mix success with failure in order to keep the readers invested. Yeah. If they're failing all the time, then the story just feels hopeless.
Yeah, and it's a slog to read at that point. I imagine if you're struggling to get through your first draft, that's a bit of an indication as well, right? So yeah, you have to give your characters some wins as the story goes along. And then what about world building? I imagine that might be a little tricky if the world's really strong in your head and you're reading it yourself, like knowing what's actually paying attention to specifically what's being disclosed in the storyline versus what's in your head about the world already.
Yeah. If you're writing speculative fiction of any kind, fantasy or science fiction, the world building is really important. And I suggest re-watching our video on world building before doing the revision, so the main points are foremost in your mind.
If you want to watch that video, there's a link up there somewhere.
Yeah. The main thing is that your world building needs to be consistent and clear about the cultural and magical rules.
Apart from rewatching our video on dialogue writing, any tips on evaluating dialogue in the first draft?
Yeah, the best way to evaluate dialogue is to actually read it aloud. You need to make sure that your characters don't all sound the same. And hearing the dialogue aloud helps you to recognise when the voices aren't matching the characters or they sound a bit stilted or unnatural.
So you can just do a reading with your partner or something to make sure it sounds natural.
Yeah.
Or not. Or you could sit in your office and do all the character voices yourself. That would be fun.
You just have to read it aloud.
Okay. I'm overcomplicating it again.
Who's got a partner like that?
So how should writers approach the actual rewrite? What do you do first? That's a lot of things you just mentioned there. So where do we start?
Right. I always start with the structural stuff first. So fix any major plot issues, delete unnecessary scenes, and move scenes around as needed. Then I go through it chapter by chapter. And if you read it aloud, read the whole thing aloud, right? And really try to hear it as if you've never heard it before, then that helps you to catch awkward phrasing, monotonous sentence structure, and lack of clarity and meaning.
You mentioned the necessity of being willing to do a complete rewrite. Are there other emotional challenges that writers will face during revision?
Yeah, I think
there is.
Yeah, I think we all want our first drafts to be amazing, but that's rarely the case. And if we're certain that it is great, then we might not see the parts that tell us it's not as great as we think it is. Accepting that your book likely needs work is a key point in making the revision process effective. But recognising the weaknesses in your writing also doesn't mean that you're a bad writer.
No,
it just means that you're doing the work to improve. So you need to be willing to do that rewrite. It'll save you time later.
Say I've written a book, it's taken me years, and I've spent, all my spare time writing this thing, and I come back to it 6 weeks later and I read it and I go, this is terrible, and I just want to throw the whole thing away.
Yeah, I totally understand that. But it's not a realistic attitude to carry with you either. It's important that we recognise that our writing will have strengths and it will have weaknesses. Once we recognise that, we can see it in the story. We can look for the strengths as well as the weaknesses. So we need to be prepared for both. I don't think I've ever seen a book that has absolutely no redeeming qualities.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's inspired to write it for a certain reason, and there'll be something that shines through it and that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we all feel dismal about our work sometimes.
It's part of being a creative.
It's part of being a creative. But then you have to reconnect with the inspiration that made you write it in the first place.
Yeah.
I think the best thing an author can do at the revision and self-editing stages is to develop the ability to put their feelings aside and be objective. You have to pretend you're a reader who has no idea what the story is about.
Yeah. And I guess that's why it's a good idea to put it away for 6 weeks before you read it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. And I've heard the term kill your darlings. So what does that mean in this circumstance?
Geez, that can be tough, especially on your first book. It needs letting go of paragraphs, sentences, even full chapters that you just love. You think that they're wonderful, but if they don't serve the story, you have to kill them. You have to get rid of them. I really struggled with this because I loved some of my metaphors and I just loved them too much. Yeah. And I actually put too many of them in one sentence.
I remember that. Yeah.
And it was
yeah.
So, if your darlings slow things down or they don't move the story forward, they need to go. Too much sweetness becomes sticky. It's like wading through honey that's up to your thighs.
You're going into metaphors again.
Sweet as it is, it becomes really hard going.
So at what point should a writer... I feel like this is a big question. At what point should I, as a new writer, send my book to beta readers and editors?
Not before you've finished the second draft. Okay, so it could be the fourth draft or whatever, but certainly not before the second draft.
Right, so after the second draft at least.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Unless you're a really experienced author.
In which case, why are you watching this video?
Yeah, I mean, beta readers need to read a story that's mostly in shape. Otherwise, you're wasting their time and you're getting feedback on a million little things that you could have fixed already, and it could be pretty crushing.
And you probably end up getting the same feedback from lots of people if there's a gaping plot hole that you missed on your second draft and then you sent it out and it's like, oh, if I'd waited another 6 weeks and looked at it again to do a third draft, then I would have found that before I sent it out to everyone and wasted
I mean,
time.
the main thing is don't send your first draft out.
Yeah.
Yeah, do that second.
Yeah. I guess the other thing is, like, with beta readers, because I've done a lot of beta reading for your books, and I think I read a very early draft. So it's like after that point, after they've read the very early draft, they then know too much already about what's the story. So they also can't look at the book with fresh eyes. So you really want it to be as close to a final product as possible before you're sending it to beta readers.
That's
really.
right, yeah.
Because you've only got a small pool of beta readers who are, we've done a video on what's a good beta reader, and you've probably only got a small pool of those. So you want to save their brains for when it's like, almost ready to go.
Absolutely.
Otherwise you're just getting the same feedback. It's like, oh, I could have figured that out myself if I'd just taken a bit more time on it. Yeah. So any words of encouragement for an author who's written their first draft?
Yeah, well, if I could revise my way from a very messy first draft of my first novel to an award-winning novel, which I did with my first novel, which I wrote before I knew anything about writing, then so can you. The secret, don't give up, stick with it, trust the process, and always aim to improve. And of course, if you get stuck, just contact me for a manuscript appraisal, and I'll take a look at it and help you sort out where to go next.
Great. And authors, if you're up to revising your novel, click the link in the description to download our novel revision checklist to help you with the process. It covers all of the questions you need to ask yourself about your story to check that you have the big picture elements in place.
And don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you don't miss the next video in our writing tips series.
Thanks for watching.
Bye. That was pretty cool.